Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our whole mission here is to be your high-speed knowledge processor. We take this mountain of conflicting advice, all the articles, the dense research, and we cut right to what you, the well-informed listener, actually need to know.
That's it, exactly. We're not about trends or, quick fixes. We're here to turn all that noise into something you can actually use. Today, we're focused on giving you the leverage of being truly science-based, especially with fitness and nutrition. The noise there is, it's louder than anywhere else.
Oh, absolutely. It feels like every week there's a new guru who's found the secret. It's always a special oil or a certain fasting window or some magic supplement.
Right, and they package it up like it's the one single key to everything.
Yeah, exactly. But our sources today, which, they come from a synthesis of a ton of peer-reviewed data and really respected analysis, they tell a much simpler and I think a much more powerful story.
Yeah, we've really drilled down into the topics that cause the most confusion, but also have the most potential for real improvement. So we're talking protein myths, the whole fasted versus fed training debate, the reality of body recomposition.
And of course, the big ones, seed oils and artificial sweeteners. We promise to deliver practical science-backed tools you can apply literally today.
So you can start wasting mental energy and physical energy on myths that they don't matter.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting with what is, without a doubt, the most important macronutrient for body composition. Protein. For as long as I can remember being in a gym, there was this sacred rule. You cannot have more than 30 grams of protein in one meal. It was in every magazine. You heard it from everyone. It was treated like gospel. Like your body would just, waste anything above that. But you're telling us this limit is, well, to put it politely, an oversimplification.
It's way more than an oversimplification. It's a total misapplication of the science. It's a classic case of confusing two separate but related physiological ideas, that popular 20 to 30 gram number. It refers only to the point where the acute signaling for muscle protein synthesis, or MPS, seems to max out in a single dose.
Right, MPS. And for anyone who needs a quick refresher, that's basically the body's biochemical signal to start repairing and building new muscle tissue.
Correct. But here's the crucial part. That MPS plateau, that 30-gram limit, it does not mean the body suddenly closes up shop and stops using the rest of the protein. It says nothing about the body's total capacity for digestion, absorption, and, utilization.
And that is the critical distinction. That's what gets lost.
Yeah.
Your body uses protein for a massive range of things beyond just building biceps.
Oh, huge.
For your immune system, for making enzymes, neurotransmitters, just maintaining everything, repairing countless tissues all over the body. So even if the muscle-building signal peaks, the rest of those amino acids are still being put to good work somewhere else. They're not wasted.
Exactly. And the utilization rate itself is super flexible. A huge controlling factor is how fast those amino acids become available. If you, say, drink a fast-digesting whey isolate shake, you get this sharp, quick spike in MPS.
Okay.
But if that same protein is part of a mixed meal, a meal with fat, fiber, carbohydrates, that whole process of gastric emptying just slows way, way down.
So if I eat a piece of chicken with a baked potato and some avocado, the fiber from the potato and the fat from the avocado, that whole food matrix, it basically drip feeds the amino acids over, maybe 6 or 7 hours?
That's a perfect way to put it. It's a drip feed. You've turned what might be a 2-hour spike from a shake into a slow, steady release of amino acids that lasts for hours. The complexity of the meal itself is this massive variable that the early, really restrictive research it completely ignored it. And that's how we got stuck with that rigid 30-gram rule.
I remember those old studies. Weren't they usually just testing something simple, like a few sets of leg extensions, not a real workout?
Precisely.
Yeah.
They were using really low volume training protocols, maybe, 8 to 12 total sets on one muscle group. That's not reflecting the reality of someone who's serious about hypertrophy, someone doing a high volume, full body routine.
And that's where the research, I think around 2016, really started to push back and change things. Tell us about that McNaughton study and how they changed the game.
So McNaughton and his colleagues, they saw this flaw, and they finally introduced a protocol that was more, let's say, ecologically valid for a serious lifter. They compared a 20-gram dose of protein versus a 40-gram dose post-exercise. But the key was the stimulus.
A bigger workout.
A much bigger workout. They had participants do a high-volume, full-body routine that totaled around 24 sets.
24 sets in one session. That is a serious amount of work. That's a huge stimulus.
It is, and when they did that, when they introduced that massive stimulus, the 40-gram dose showed a significantly greater and more sustained muscle protein synthesis response than the 20-gram dose. It completely challenged that decades-long belief that MPS just hits a hard ceiling at that lower amount. Their conclusion was pretty clear. The size of the training stimulus dictates the capacity for your body to actually use the nutrients.
So a bigger, harder-worked engine needs more fuel to recover and grow. It makes perfect sense intuitively, but it took the science a while to actually test a real-world workout volume. But they didn't stop at 40 grams, did they?
Yeah.
Some pushed it even further.
Right. The Tromelin study is the one that really got people talking. They took it to an extreme, really trying to find the upper limit. They compared 25 grams versus a truly massive 100 grams of slow-digesting milk protein after a workout.
100 grams.
100 grams. And yeah, they found a significantly greater MPS response with the 100-gram dose.
That's an incredible amount in one sitting. What was the catch with that finding, though?
The big caveat is that they didn't test an intermediate dose. They skipped right over 40, 50, 60 grams. Other research suggests that the true maximal anabolic dose for a single meal, for most people in a practical sense, it probably falls somewhere between 30 and 50 grams, maybe a bit higher for larger, highly trained people. The 100-gram result just proved that the body can use dramatically higher amounts, especially when the protein is slow digesting.
Okay, so if we pull all this data together, the need for a bigger stimulus, the digestion rate.
Yeah.
What's the best, most practical, research-backed advice for maximizing MPS per meal for someone trying to optimize muscle gain?
The consensus, looking at all the current literature, is that the maximal anabolic dose per meal is pretty consistently in the range of 0.4 to 0.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. That's the sweet spot for really maximizing that MPS signal.
And for simplicity, in pounds, what does that translate to?
That's roughly 0.2 to 0.25 grams per pound of your body weight. So, if you weigh 180 pounds, you're aiming for about 36 to 45 grams per meal.
That's a great per meal target. But let's zoom out. In the real world, people are busy. You miss a meal, or you end up eating most of your protein at dinner. If someone can only focus on one thing, what is the single most important factor for success?
It's the total daily requirement. That's it. It's the absolute non-negotiable foundation for all recovery and muscle building. Hitting that total is so much more important than stressing about getting exactly 35 grams in 4 separate meals. The target we see again and again for performance and muscle building is 1.6 to 1.7 grams per kilogram of body weight per day.
Which is about 0.7 to 0.8 grams per pound. If you hit that daily total, you've laid the foundation.
Exactly. And this leads us right into the whole myth of the anabolic window, which caused so much stress for so many years.
Oh, the dreaded 30-minute window? I remember that. If you didn't sprint from the squat rack to chug a shake, all your gains were supposedly gone.
Right. That concept came out of the early 2000s, and it suggested you needed fast protein and carbs like immediately after your workout. But the massive piece of context that was always missing from that early research was that the subjects were almost always training after an overnight fast.
Okay. So if you haven't eaten for 12 hours, your amino acid levels are low, you're nutrient depleted. In that specific case, yeah, the window probably is a lot shorter.
Precisely. But most people aren't doing that. Most people eat lunch or dinner before they train. If you have a mixed meal, even a moderate one, an hour or two before you exercise, the anabolic and anti-catabolic effect of that meal can last anywhere from 3 to 6 hours.
So when you start your workout, the amino acids are already floating around in your bloodstream. The window is already open and protected.
Completely. The panic is totally unnecessary. The critical data here comes from a big meta-analysis by Aragon and Krieger. They looked at all the nutrient timing studies. They compared groups that had protein right before or after the workout versus a group that hit their total protein for the day but had, a couple hours of nutrient neglect on either side of the workout.
And what was the verdict?
It was decisive. As long as the total daily protein target, that 1.6 to 1.7 grams per kilogram, was met, the timing relative to the workout made no meaningful difference in muscle size or strength gains.
That is a huge relief. It gives you so much flexibility. So the takeaway isn't that timing is totally irrelevant, but that total intake trumps timing.
And remember the basic physiology. One resistance training session elevates muscle protein synthesis for 48 to 72 hours. The real anabolic window isn't 60 minutes, it's a multi-day state of recovery. If you hit your protein goal for the day, whether you stack a huge 75-gram meal at night or spread it out, the body will use it effectively over that whole recovery period.
Okay, let's shift gears now to another huge one. Fasted training. Fasted cardio especially has had incredible staying power. The logic, it seems sound on paper. If you train without food in your system, you don't have immediate carbs for fuel, so your body has to turn to stored fat for energy.
Yeah.
Is that initial idea correct?
The initial mechanism is, yes, sound. When you train in a fasted state, so 8 to 10 hours after you last ate, you do have greater fat oxidation during the workout itself. You'll burn a higher percentage of body fat and intramuscular fat during that 45 minutes on the treadmill compared to someone who just ate a banana.
Okay, so right there, that sounds like a win for the fasted camp. If my goal is to lose fat, why wouldn't I want to maximize fat burning while I'm exercising? This must be where the equivalence principle comes in to complicate things.
This is exactly where it comes in. The equivalence principle just reminds us that measuring what happens during the workout is only a snapshot in time. It's really short-sighted. Think of it this way. The person who trained fed burned the fuel. They just ate their breakfast, so they spared their body fat for that time. The person who trained fasted burned their body fat, but now they have to eat, and their body will use that food to replenish what they burned.
So later in the day, when the person who trained fed is resting or fasting overnight.
Exactly. That person will then have higher fat oxidation later in the day because their body needs to reach the same overall energy balance. The body is always seeking homeostasis. So if you take two groups and they eat the exact same number of total calories and macros by the end of a 24-hour period, the net difference in fat loss is 0.
So the total energy balance over the full day is the same. The body just shifts when it burns the fat, either during the workout if you're fasted or later on during rest if you were fed.
Precisely. And this was tested really rigorously in a big 2014 study by Brad Schoenfeld. He looked specifically at college-age women, which is a group often targeted by this advice. They did low to moderate intensity cardio, the so-called fat burning zone, 3 times a week.
And what were the two conditions?
One group had an identical meal, a shake, before their cardio session. The other group had that exact same shake after their cardio. This made sure the total daily calories and macros were perfectly matched between the two groups. It was a really well-controlled study.
And after 6 weeks, what did they find?
No statistically significant difference in body fat reduction. None. They lost the same amount of fat. And this is really crucial. Neither group lost any lean body mass, even though they were only doing moderate cardio and no resistance training in the trial.
That's a powerful point. For fat loss, fasted versus fed training is basically a wash, as long as your total calories are controlled.
The takeaway for you, the listener, is just to prioritize personal preference. It's that simple. If you feel dizzy or weak training fasted, eat something. If you feel sharp and energized training on an empty stomach, then go for it. Don't fight your body or your schedule for a tiny, temporary benefit that gets negated by the end of the day anyway.
This brings us right back to the cornerstone, the one thing that does matter a ton: protein. We should probably reiterate protein's triple threat here, because it explains why it's so non-negotiable for high-quality weight loss no matter when you train.
It's absolutely indispensable, especially when you're in a caloric deficit and trying to avoid losing muscle. There are 3 core reasons why protein is just in a different league than carbs and fats.
Okay, reason number 1, supporting our metabolic engine.
That's skeletal muscle support. Protein gives you the raw materials, the amino acids, to maintain and repair your lean body mass. And lean mass is your primary metabolic engine. The more you have, the better your body is at managing fuel, which makes it easier to sustain a healthy metabolism.
Right. Losing muscle while dieting is the worst thing you can do for long-term success.
It's a disaster for long-term goals.
Yeah.
Okay, number 2, managing hunger, which is the enemy of any diet. Satiety. Protein is, by far, the most satiating macronutrient. It's not even close. If you want to stick to a calorie deficit, you have to manage hunger. And a high protein intake is your single best tool for doing that.
And the third reason, the one people often forget, is the metabolic cost, just to process the food itself.
The thermit effect of food, or TF. Protein is the most calorically expensive macro to process. Your body has to burn more calories just to digest, absorb, and metabolize protein than it does for carbs or fats.
How much more are we talking about?
Well, for carbs and fats, it's maybe 5% to 15% of their caloric value. For protein, it's significantly more. It's often cited as being 20% to 30%. So if you eat 100 calories of protein, your body might burn 25 of those calories just breaking it down. It gives you this subtle but powerful metabolic advantage.
This sets the stage perfectly for what is, the holy grail of fitness.
Yeah.
Body recomposition. Losing fat and gaining muscle at the same time. For decades, the dogma was you can't do both. You need a surplus to build, a deficit to burn. But is recomp actually possible for a regular person?
Oh, absolutely. Body recomposition is a well-documented physiological thing. Now, it's definitely easier for beginners or people who have more body fat to draw energy from, but it's not impossible for experienced lifters.
And the conventional wisdom seems to just completely fall apart when you drive protein intake high enough.
That is the common thread in pretty much every successful recomp study. And what's really surprising is that some of the data suggests recomp can happen even in the slight caloric surplus.
A surplus.
Yeah, we're talking maybe 10% above maintenance, like 200 or 300 calories, but only, and this is the key, only when protein intake is driven extremely high, like upwards of 1 to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight.
Wait, if I'm in a calorie surplus, shouldn't I be gaining fat? Thermodynamics. How does protein override that?
It doesn't override it, but it dramatically changes the math we were just talking about with TIFA. Because protein has such a high thermic effect, and because so much of that energy gets funneled into muscle repair, the net energy that's actually available to be stored as fat goes way down.
This is where those Antonio studies come in, right? They showed that just adding protein to a normal diet could cause recomp, or at least stop fat gain, even though people were eating more calories.
Yes, Antonio and his team did these foundational studies where they just told people to keep eating their normal diet, but add an extra 50 to 100 grams of quality protein on top of it every day.
Which would instantly put them in a surplus.
Instantly. They were in a surplus of several hundred calories, and yet they either experienced actual body recomp losing fat and gaining muscle, or at the very least, they didn't gain any significant body fat despite eating more.
And that's where we get those almost legendary anecdotal reports about subjects like feeling hotter.
Yes. The story that always gets repeated is that some subjects reported sweating in their sleep. Now, that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but it's a great illustration of the massive thermic effect you get from processing that much protein. It just underscores that when you overfeed on calories purely from protein, your body handles that surplus completely differently than if it came from, pizza.
So the advice for someone looking to recomp is pretty clear. If you're going to increase your calories to try and build muscle, make sure that surplus comes almost entirely from quality protein.
Absolutely. It's all about that protein leverage.
Okay, so speaking of quality, we have to touch on the animal versus plant protein debate. You hear protein is protein, but chemically, animal sources do have a built-in advantage, don't they?
Gram for gram, yes. As a group, animal proteins are just intrinsically superior. They're more anabolic because they have a higher proportion of essential amino acids, or EAAs, and especially the branched chain amino acids, the BCAAs.
And within the BCAAs, there's one that's like the main on switch for muscle growth.
That's leucine. Leucine is the key amino acid that directly triggers the mTOR signaling pathway, which is the cellular machinery that kicks off muscle protein synthesis. Animal proteins, especially meat and dairy, just have a much higher percentage of leucine than most plant sources. It's a higher quality, more anabolic package.
That sounds like a pretty decisive win for omnivores. But we've seen some newer research that suggests a really well-planned vegan diet can get the same results. How do they make up for that lower leucine content?
This is where it gets really interesting. A lot of the older studies were just, whey protein versus pea protein. But more recent, longer-term trials, like those referenced from Montia and Lorraine, have compared omnivores against strict vegans over a whole training program.
What was the key part of their study design?
They took both groups and put them on a 12-week resistance training program, but they made sure to equate the total daily protein intake. They boosted the vegan group's protein up to that optimal 1.6 grams per kilogram target.
And they had to use supplements for that, right? It's hard to get that much from whole plant foods.
Yeah, they often use concentrated sources like soy isolate or mycoprotein, which is corn, to hit that number. So the vegans were eating the same amount of protein, but it was still inherently lower in that key trigger, leucine.
What happened with muscle and strength gains?
There were no significant differences between the groups. None. Over 12 weeks, they gained the same amount of muscle and strength. It's a profound finding. It shows that if you're diligent enough to hit that total daily protein target, your body can compensate for the lower EAA and BCAA content of the plant sources.
So the big training stimulus and just having enough total amino acids available is enough to kind of mask those subtle differences in protein type.
That's the takeaway. A really well-constructed, high-protein vegan diet can compete, but it takes more work. It probably requires supplementation, and you have to be more mindful, whereas an omnivore just has an easier time hitting the targets because of the protein density of animal foods.
Okay, let's talk about the other side of the plate now, starting with carbs. We can get through fiber pretty quick. Fiber's good. It's critical for gut health and feeling full.
Totally. Get it from whole foods, fruits, vegetables, legumes. I will add one small caution, though. The term whole grains isn't an automatic health halo. You can have super processed foods like whole grain crackers that are still designed to be hyper palatable and easy to overeat. Unprocessed is always better.
Good point. So let's look at the starches and sugars. If we assume total calories, and most importantly, protein are perfectly matched, do carbs actually stop you from losing fat?
Look, when you dig into all the really good, well-controlled studies, the ones where they control everything, they all point to the same thing. When total calories and protein are equated, there is no significant difference in fat loss between high-carb diets and very low-carb keto diets.
Calories and protein are the great equalizers.
They are. The reason low-carb diets like keto often work so well for weight loss isn't some metabolic magic, it's a behavioral mechanism.
How so?
When people go on a ketogenic diet and are told to eat as much as they want, they spontaneously eat hundreds of calories less per day, sometimes 400 up 900 fewer calories. And it's for two reasons. First, the high protein and fat is extremely filling, so you're less hungry. And second, the restriction just eliminates an entire category of hyperpalatable processed foods. It's a great adherence strategy, but it doesn't work because carbs are somehow inherently fattening.
So how does this translate into practical advice for added sugars?
Added extrinsic sugars, so stuff in processed foods, syrups, honey, table sugar, you have to limit them. They do two bad things. They dilute the nutritional value of your diet, and they drive hyperpalatability without making you feel full. The general advice is to limit added sugars to a maximum of 10% of your total calories.
So for a 2,000-calorie diet, that's what, 40 to 50 grams of added sugar a day, max? That's a really practical number.
It is. It gives you some flexibility, but puts up a necessary guardrail against just passively overeating empty calories.
Now, let's get into low-calorie sweeteners.
Yeah.
The internet is just a swamp of fear-mongering about these. If we look at the actual clinical data, what's the real story?
We have to split them, not lump them all together. That's the first mistake people make. When you're talking about things like aspartame or sucralose, the amounts you'd need to consume to see negative health outcomes in the toxicology literature are, frankly, described by researchers as absurd. They're levels a normal person could never physically consume.
So the risk is very low.
The risk is generally considered low, probably lower than a lot of other environmental things we're exposed to. But there is one outlier. One compound that does seem to pop up with negative data, especially with the gut microbiome.
And that would be?
That's saccharin. It's the main sweetener that has shown some concerning potential in the literature. We're talking negative effects on gut bacteria, and in some people, that can lead to impaired glucose tolerance.
How could a sweetener mess with your blood sugar control?
The thinking is that saccharin might selectively feed certain types of gut bacteria while starving out others. And that shift in your microbiome can then trigger metabolic changes that affect how your body handles sugar from your diet. It's important to note, though, saccharin is pretty much commercially extinct. You don't see it much anymore in major products.
Right. And for people who are actively trying to lose weight, the data on diet sodas and things is actually surprisingly positive.
Yes. The controlled trials consistently show that using low-calorie sweetened drinks is a net positive tool for weight loss. It's a harm reduction strategy. It helps people stick to a calorie deficit, especially if the alternative is a full sugar soda.
Let's pivot to the idea of a low-inflammation diet. You see these diets that are super restrictive. Meat, fish, eggs, hard cheese, fruit, veggies, oils, but zero starches, no refined carbs, no alcohol. They claim their success is from being anti-inflammatory. What's really driving the results?
I really believe its success has very little to do with some magical anti-inflammatory property of those specific foods. It has everything to do with what you're eliminating. By cutting out starches and refined carbs, you completely remove the main source of hyperpalatability from the modern diet.
That concept again, hyperpalatability. That engineered combo of high refined carbs, salt, and fat.
Exactly. That's the combo in chips, cookies, almost any ultra-processed food. It makes it effortless to eat thousands of calories without feeling full. When you get rid of that, you just spontaneously eat less because the food is less rewarding and more naturally filling. And at the end of the day, any diet that helps you lose a significant amount of body fat is, by definition, an anti-inflammatory diet. Fat loss itself is the best anti-inflammatory strategy there is.
Yeah. We just talked about that combo of refined carbs and fat.
Yeah.
Let's drill down into one of the most controversial parts of that, the fats themselves. Specifically, this war on seed oils, vilifying canola, corn, soy oil. And it's become an internet religion. What does the expert consensus say?
The scientific consensus is actually pretty straightforward. The intense fear around seed oils is largely exaggerated, sometimes to the point of being fictional, and it's just not supported by the bulk of the data. The science is clear that while one side loves to vilify seed oils, the other side tends to equally vilify land animal fats like butter. And when you actually compare the evidence, you find more adverse outcomes linked to excessive land animal fat than from seed oils.
That is completely the opposite of the popular narrative online, which is that seed oils are basically poison.
I know, and researchers are genuinely confused by the intensity of the scare. Take canola oil. It's a prime target. There was a major meta-analysis that compared canola oil directly to olive oil on how they affect blood lipids, specifically LDL cholesterol. And the results were surprising.
What did you?
Canola oil actually outperformed olive oil in improving blood profiles. It was better at lowering LDL, the bad cholesterol.
Wait, canola oil, the one that's supposed to be so bad for us, beat olive oil, the gold standard. How's
Yeah.
that possible?
It's because of its composition. Canola oil has an unusually high proportion of omega-3 fatty acids compared to most other vegetable oils, and that specific type of fat has recognized cardiovascular benefits, which is why it had a more positive effect in that controlled analysis.
So the negative reputation of seed oils isn't about the oil itself, it's about the company it keeps.
That is the perfect way to put it. It's about what the oil is riding in. Seed oils are mostly consumed in hyper-palatable junk food french fries, packaged snacks, fast food. The oils get the blame because they're used in the wrong vehicle. If your overall diet is terrible, swapping canola for butter isn't going to fix the problem.
What about the processing concerns? The use of hexane or high heat and refinement?
The concerns over trace amounts of hexane are, from a safety standpoint, generally overblown. The residue levels in refined oils, and that includes many olive oils, which also undergo some refinement, are well below the safety threshold set by regulatory bodies. Focusing on that misses the big picture, which is the quality of the whole diet.
Okay, let's switch to saturated fats then, and the need for moderation. We're talking about butter, lard, beef tallow.
If you're consuming excessive amounts, people putting sticks of butter in their coffee or relying on tallow for most of their calories, you are absolutely hedging your bets toward increased cardiovascular risk, specifically by raising your LDL cholesterol.
But you put it at a really fascinating nuance within dairy itself, comparing butter to cream. It just shows how complex this all is.
It really does. There's this interesting study showing that cream, even though it's high in saturated fat, has a surprisingly neutral effect on blood lipids, whereas butter tends to skew them in a bad direction. The theory is that it's because of a structure called the MFGM,
The MFGM.
the milk-fat globule membrane. It's this complex, three-layered coating of phospholipids and proteins that surrounds the fat droplets in milk and cream. That membrane is mostly intact in cream, but it gets destroyed in the churning process to make butter.
And that membrane might change how the fat is absorbed.
That's the idea. It's believed that the MFGM structure might modulate how the saturated fat is absorbed in your gut, leading to a more neutral outcome compared to the naked fat in butter. Tiny differences matter.
So does this mean we should aim for zero saturated fat?
Absolutely not. A zero saturated fat diet is not optimal and it's not sustainable. You can end up with things like dry skin, brittle hair. You need some for hormone production and vitamin absorption. The advice is always moderation, not total elimination.
So for someone who wants to keep carbs low but also protect their heart health, what's a good model for fat intake?
The Mediterranean keto model is a much better approach. So you follow a low-carb pattern, but you get most of your fats from high-quality plant-based sources like nuts, seeds, avocado, and extra virgin olive oil instead of loading up on butter and lard. You get the metabolic benefits of carb restriction with the heart-healthy fat profile of the Mediterranean diet.
Let's quickly hit two things many people use daily. Caffeine and alcohol. First, caffeine. Does it actually give you an edge for fat loss?
Yes, a modest one. Caffeine from coffee, tea, yerba mate. It does have a small positive effect on fat mobilization. It acts as a mild lipolytic agent. And the overall literature on coffee and tea is overwhelmingly positive for health, for cardiovascular outcomes and mortality, up to about 3 or 4 cups a day. It's a healthy, performance-enhancing staple.
Now for the bad news. Alcohol.
hmm
We know the obvious problems. It's high in calories, it leads to bad food choices. But what is its biggest, most damaging long-term effect on body composition?
It's a triple threat, really. You have the caloric burden, as you said, then you have the disinhibition, which just destroys your dietary adherence. But the most critical, most overlooked long-term cost is the profound and chronic disruption of your sleep architecture.
I think most people assume that because a few drinks help them pass out, they're getting good sleep.
And that's the dangerous myth. Alcohol is a sedative, not a sleep aid. It helps you fall asleep faster, yes, but it severely fragments and reduces your time in the two most restorative stages, REM sleep and deep sleep.
And those are the stages where all the repair and recovery happens.
All of it. Deep sleep is for physical repair, growth hormone release. REM is for cognitive function. When you chronically impair that recovery night after night, you end up in a state of higher systemic inflammation and higher cortisol. Chronically high cortisol hinders fat loss and breaks down muscle. That cumulative damage from poor sleep is one of the biggest hidden costs to your health and body composition goals.
Let's talk about female-specific considerations for a minute. This is an area that's often filled with a lot of hype. Are there really fundamental differences in nutrition between men and women, other than just adjusting for size?
For the most part, no. Once you adjust for total body mass and lean mass, which determines your calorie and protein needs, there are very few meaningful universal differences. The core principles, total calories, high protein, resistance training, they apply equally to everyone.
So no magic macro ratios or anything like that.
Not fundamentally. Where the advice does need to be individualized is in managing the monthly hormonal fluctuations that women experience.
You mean managing the menstrual cycle, which can bring on intense cravings and low energy?
Exactly. During that late luteal phase, for about a week, it's very common to have increased cravings and lethargy. Instead of trying to white-knuckle through a strict diet during that week, we recommend using strategic diet breaks.
What does that look like in practice?
You basically plan for it. If you're dieting, you make that week of your cycle a maintenance week, or at least a higher calorie week. You use that extra food to satisfy cravings and manage your energy. It improves long-term adherence because you're working with your body's natural urges, not fighting them.
What about menopause? There's a lot of fear around that, the idea that your metabolism just tanks and you gain a ton of weight overnight.
We need to be realistic about it, but without the scaremongering. The Big Swan study, which tracked women through the menopausal transition, gives us a dose of reality.
What do they find about body composition?
They found that the average fat gain during that transition period was only about 3.5 pounds, and the average lean mass loss was only about half a pound. Now, those changes are real and frustrating, but it's not the catastrophic event it's often made out to be. The bigger problem is usually the concurrent symptoms.
The hot flashes, poor sleep, joint pain. That makes it really hard to stick to a plan and recover.
Exactly. So practitioners need to adjust expectations. If you'd normally aim for a 1 pound per week fat loss goal, maybe you adjust that to half a pound a week for someone going through menopause. It gives them the grace to manage symptoms and stay consistent without feeling like they're failing.
Let's get into supplements, starting with collagen. It often gets dismissed in bodybuilding circles because it's not high in leucine, but you take it. Why?
It gets dismissed based on a false premise, the idea that every protein has to be judged on its ability to build muscle. I don't take it for that. I view it as a supplement for connective tissue integrity, totally separate from muscle gain.
You're feeding a different system.
Precisely. Collagen is the most abundant protein in the body. Your skin is 80% collagen by dry weight. It's the matrix for your joints, tendons, cartilage. I take 15 grams a day, not for my biceps, but to provide the raw materials for all that connective tissue, especially since I don't eat a lot of cartilage or skin.
You also have a specific personal supplement stack for general health. What's your hierarchy?
Yeah, this is my personal, let's call it bro-scientific cluster. It's based on filling the most likely gaps in a normal diet.
Number 1 is the foundation.
A good multivitamin mineral. It's just a non-negotiable insurance policy. It's really hard to get every single micronutrient you need every day, especially when you're dieting.
Next up, the sunshine vitamin.
Vitamin D3. Deficiency is incredibly common. I take a higher dose, 4,000 IUs, just to ensure I'm sufficient given how important it is for hormones and immune function.
And for inflammation.
Fish oil. I aim for about 3 grams of total oil, which gives me about 1 gram of combined EPA and DHA. The data is still very strong for its anti-inflammatory and cardiovascular benefits.
Magnesium, but a specific kind.
Magnesium citrate or glycinate. I tell everyone to avoid magnesium oxide. It has terrible bioavailability. It's basically a very expensive laxative, not a magnesium supplement.
And for performance, the most proven supplement there is.
Creatine monohydrate. 5 grams a day, every day. The benefits for performance, strength, even cognitive function, they're just too well established to ignore.
And finally, an extra dose of vitamin C.
Yep, 1 gram of vitamin C. Partly for general immune support, and partly because it has synergy with collagen for connective tissue health.
Okay, finally, let's talk training. You train often, but you admit you don't do a lot of formal, long cardio sessions. You focus on efficiency and enjoyment.
The best program is always the one you actually enjoy and can stick to. For me, that means making my resistance training as time efficient as possible and actually merging it with a cardio stimulus. I want high density in my workouts.
And you do that with short rest protocols? Can you give us a couple of examples?
The first one is supersets. So you pair opposing muscle groups, chest and back, or biceps and triceps, and you alternate between them with very little rest. One muscle works while the other rests. It cuts your workout time down and keeps your heart rate high.
And the second, more intense one.
Cluster sets. This is great for more advanced lifters. You take a heavy set and you break it up with tiny rest periods, like 10 to 20 seconds. So instead of doing one set of 12 reps to failure, you might do 4 mini sets of 3 reps with a 10-second pause in between.
And why is that so effective?
It lets you lift a greater total volume with a heavy weight in less time because those little rests let you recover just enough. It effectively merges heavy resistance training with a high-intensity cardio stimulus. It's an incredibly dense and time-saving way to train. #outro.
This has been an incredibly clarifying deep dive. We've cut through years of just bad advice and unnecessary anxiety. Let's just summarize the big practical takeaways.
Focus on the big boulders. First, protein total trumps timing. Get your 1.6 to 1.7 grams per kilogram every day. That 30-gram limit is bunk. Stack your protein if you need to.
Right. And fasted versus fed training doesn't matter for fat loss if your calories are controlled.
Yeah.
Just do what feels best for your energy levels.
A body recomp is possible, even in a slight surplus, but only if you drive protein intake through the roof to leverage that thermic effect.
The fear around seed oils is overblown. They're usually just in the wrong vehicle junk food. And for saturated fat, moderation is key. Think more Mediterranean keto with nuts and olive oil, less sticks of butter.
And finally, be so careful with alcohol. The disruption to your sleep architecture is a massive hidden cost to your recovery and your goals.
This entire deep dive has really given you, the listener, scientific flexibility. You don't have to panic about a 30-minute window. You don't have to force yourself to train fasted if you hate it. You now have the tools to build a system that works for your life, not against it.
And remember, the real magic is finding an approach that's both effective and sustainable for you. Consistency will beat perfection every single time.
So what does this all mean for you? The provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. How will you use this newfound flexibility, this knowledge that your total intake matters more than rigid timing, to simplify your routine, remove the stress, and make your plan 90% consistent instead of chasing that impossible 100% perfection? Go find the joy in it and just stay consistent.